Hi, everybody. Today I will be talking about Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management. This solution was earlier referred to as information governance. We have rebranded our compliance solutions last week to align with our One Microsoft philosophy so that you can now govern, protect, and meet your compliance requirements of your Microsoft as well as non-Microsoft data landscape. My colleague Leo will talk about records management later during the session. Over the past 2 years, organizations have seen a massive increase in their digital footprint. So, as per a recent survey, it says that on an average, only 25% of overall content within the organization has current business value. And 69% of the content may be redundant, obsolete, and has no current business value. Now, to add to this, the recent great reshuffle has left blind spots in the data landscape, and this dark, obsolete data is now growing at a rate of 62% per year. We hear from a lot of our customers that they have a retain all policy simply because they don't have the tools to help them identify and dispose of the low value content. So hoarding so much data can introduce data leaks and threats. It also increases storage costs and could also lead to non-compliance against certain regulations. Also, another common practice we hear is that some organizations may be duplicating information into multiple systems for various reasons. In fact, organizations may be wrestling on an average with 5 different content systems and repositories. For example, one of the IT decision makers mentioned that they make one copy of content for archive, one copy for e-discovery, one copy for backup, and one for records management so that they can satisfy multiple objectives of information management. Duplicating information and moving the copy to another system creates several risks. Firstly, the information integrity and fidelity could be lost in the reshuffle. While you're moving the files, security risks of data tampering increases as well. And lastly, when you're searching or processing the information, you need to constantly reconcile between the systems, which might reduce your productivity and efficiency. Microsoft Purview helps overcome the challenges that we discussed, and it provides a unified information protection, data governance, and risk management solutions so that customers can manage all their data from one place. Also, Microsoft Purview can protect and govern data wherever it lives. In our previous webinar session, we saw how organizations can know their data landscape, protect the data, and prevent data loss. In today's session, we will see how Microsoft Purview can help you govern data with data lifecycle management and records management solutions. Microsoft Purview provides you with tools and capabilities to classify the content and retain the content that you need to keep, and also delete the content that you no longer need. Retaining and deleting content is often needed for compliance and regulatory requirements, but deleting the content that no longer has business value also helps you manage risk and liability and also reduces your attack surface. For governing data across your broader digital estate, you can leverage data lifecycle management capabilities like retention policies and retention labels. You can apply retention policies to Microsoft 365 workloads like Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Teams, and you can retain or delete the content. When you configure a retention policy, you can target all mailboxes and sites and teams in the organization, or only mailbox and sites of specific users or departments or regions. For data beyond Microsoft 365, we provide pre-built data connectors for social media, then text messages, chats, as well as collaboration data. You can import content from non-Microsoft 365 sources, and you can perform data lifecycle management and e-discovery of this third-party content as well. Sometimes there may be certain types of content within the mailboxes or sites that need longer retention period than the overall organizational retention policy. So in such cases, you can classify the content using retention labels, and you can set a longer retention period on that content. Retention labels can be applied to content manually, or you can automatically apply retention labels based on various conditions. Then we also have other capabilities here, like mailbox archiving. Mailbox archiving provides users with additional 100 GB of mailbox storage space. If mailboxes require more than additional 100 GB storage, you can leverage auto-expanding archiving as well. Then inactive mailboxes help you retain mailbox content after the employees leave the organization. We also provide import service for PST files by using network upload or drive shipping. To manage high value items for like business, legal, or regulatory record keeping requirements, you can use records management features. Records can be important documents like tax statements or financial records of the organization, contracts or hiring information, etc. This records management provides a specialized workflows like event-based retention, then multi-stage disposition workflows, proof of disposal, then records immutability, and so on. Leo will be covering those later during the session. So to summarize, Microsoft Purview Data Lifecycle Management provides in-place data retention and records management capabilities. So this way you can avoid creating duplicate information across multiple systems, which ultimately reduces productivity loss and risk. Now let's see a demo of data lifecycle management capabilities. I am in Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. Let's go to Solutions and Catalog here. You can govern your data using data lifecycle management and records management capabilities. With data lifecycle management, you can keep what you need and delete what you don't. You can also classify content and manage your content lifecycle. So let's view the solution here. So here you can see an overview of data lifecycle management solution, any license requirements and permissions that are required to set up the policies. Also, it says you can get around 360 points in Compliance Manager for implementing data lifecycle management policies. So this helps you improve your compliance posture and be compliant with various regulations. Let's go to this Compliance Manager here. You can also see a list of step-by-step instructions for data lifecycle management or information governance in order for you to be compliant with various regulations like CGIS, then CMMC level 5, NIST 853, and so on. If we go to the data lifecycle management page, you can create retention policies, retention labels. You can also leverage import and archive capabilities so that you can govern your broader digital estate. With retention policies, you can manage data lifecycle of various locations like mailboxes, then SharePoint sites, Teams, and also OneDrive for Business for your entire organization or for specific users or departments or agencies. A retention policy applies the retention or deletion settings to a container like a mailbox or a site, and all the items within that container will inherit the retention settings. Let's now create a retention policy. So let's pick up a use case. Suppose I want to retain all mailboxes and sites within a specific agency for 5 years. I'm going to give it a name and click Next. So retention policy can be configured to be either static or adaptive. A static policy is applied to a fixed set of locations and must be manually updated if those locations change. So example, if a user moves from one department to other, the static policy will not be automatically updated. The advantage of using adaptive policies are that They are based on Azure AD attributes or SharePoint properties, and they will be automatically updated based on the properties. So here I'm creating a policy that must be applied to all the users within the DHS department. So I will be using the adaptive scope. Then here I can add the scopes to this retention policy. I have already pre-created 2 adaptive scopes. One scope to include the mailboxes and OneDrive for Business of all the users whose Azure AD attribute matches the agency name DHS. And I've created another scope here to match all the SharePoint sites that have the agency name DHS in their site name. Now I can choose various locations to apply the retention policy. So here you can see Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, then Teams chat, as well as the Teams private channel messages locations as well. So next you can decide the retention settings. You can retain the content for a specific period like 5 years. So we can choose the start of the 5-year retention period from when the content was created or since it was last modified. Next, you can decide what happens to the content at the end of 5-year retention period. You can delete the content automatically after 5 years, or you can choose to do nothing at the end of 5 years. You can also retain the content forever. This option is not recommended because you will end up holding a lot of content and your data might exponentially increase. Sometimes your intention may be to only get rid of certain unused and non-critical content, right? So example, there may be a holiday potluck team or some temporary project site that needs cleanup. So for such situations, you can choose to only delete the items after a certain duration. Once you decide the retention settings, you can submit this retention policy. Now this policy will start applying retention settings to all the items within the mailboxes, SharePoint sites, and other locations that are included in the scope. Now let's see how to configure an adaptive scope. So let's create a scope here. Let's say I want to create a scope that targets users of a specific agency like DHS. So give it a name. You can create adaptive scopes for users based on their first name or last name or department Azure AD attribute. For SharePoint sites, you can use site name, then site URL, as well as refinable strings. And for Microsoft 365 groups, you can use Azure AD attributes like name, description, email address, and so on. For this example, I will be using the users scope. So here I can specify which users will be included in my adaptive scope. So example, I have specified the Azure AD department attribute as DHS. So this will scope the policy to all the users in my DHS department. You can also use advanced query builder to build complex queries. And then you can include this scope in your retention policies. Now let's see the end user experience after the retention policy takes effect. This is a SharePoint site with 5-year retention policy. Let's say an end user, Megan, deletes this file here. A copy of this file will be saved in preservation hold library within the site, and it will be retained and searchable in eDiscovery till the end of its retention period. This is Alan's mailbox, and it has 5-year retention period. Now, if Alan deletes this mail, a copy of this mail will be stored in the hidden recoverable items folder for this mailbox, and it will be retained and searchable in eDiscovery till the end of its retention period. This is the eDiscovery content search portal. Now, if your eDiscovery manager searches for those deleted items, they can find that in the search results here, and they can recover this content if required. We We also provide inactive mailbox feature, which helps you retain mailbox content of former employees for regulatory or other reasons. If a retention policy is applied to a mailbox, and if the Microsoft 365 user account is deleted, the mailbox will be converted into an inactive mailbox. Inactive mailboxes will eliminate the task of copying departed users' content to other locations. Now let's talk about retention labels. If you need exceptions such as a longer retention period for certain individual emails or documents, you can achieve this using retention labels. You can publish the labels to apps so that users can apply the labels manually, or you can automatically apply labels based on various conditions. Let's take a use case. Suppose there's this SharePoint site with 5 years retention policy, but I want only legal documents inside that site to have a longer retention period of 7 years. So in such situation, you can classify those legal documents with retention labels, and then those legal documents will get the retention setting of 7 years. Let me now show you how to create a retention label. So click on create label. Let's create a label called agreements. Now, when this label is applied to items, the content is retained or deleted based on the settings that you choose here. So let's select the retention of content to be 7 years. You can start the retention period based on when the item was created, or when the item was last modified, or when the item was labeled. You can also trigger the retention period based on an event, like when a contract expires or during an employee termination. At the end of the retention period, you can delete items automatically, or you can leave them as they are. Sometimes you may want reviewers to manually review the content before disposing it off. So at the end of the retention period, you can trigger a manual disposition review as well. There are also other actions that can be configured on items with a retention label. For example, you can retain the labeled items forever, or you can also configure labeled items to be only deleted after certain years as well. Now, sometimes you may want to retain, you may not want to retain or delete the items, but just want to classify them so that they are easily searchable in the future. So for such scenarios, you can choose this last option over here. Then you can finish creating these labels. And once these labels are created, you can publish them to specific mailboxes or sites using static or adaptive scopes. And after publishing the labels, users will see the labels in the published location and can manually apply them to content. Manually applying label may be error prone and not a scalable approach. So you can identify content based on certain conditions and apply retention labels automatically using auto apply a label. So here you can automatically detect content that contains sensitive information. For example, we provide more than 200 out-of-the-box patterns under various categories and templates like credit card numbers, passport numbers, then PII identifiers, medical terms, etc. You can also auto-apply labels based on keywords or files metadata as well as properties. So for Exchange, you can use properties like sender domain or sent date or received date, etc. And for SharePoint, you can use content type properties or various other refundable properties. You can also use trainable classifiers, which can identify the type of content using machine learning models. It can be especially helpful in identifying documents that cannot be easily found by pattern recognition. You can also create your own custom classifiers that are tailored to your organization as well. So here you can choose from out-of-the-box trainable classifiers like agreements, then legal affairs, healthcare template, IT template, finance template, and so on. Now let's finish creating this label policy. There's also a policy lookup option here where you can quickly find out what retention policies or label policies apply to a user or a site. Now let's take a look at end user experience with retention labels. So here is an example of a user manually applying retention label to content in Exchange Online mailbox. This user's mailbox has a 5-year retention policy on it. But this user wants to extend the retention of agreement-related emails to 7 years. The administrator has published several retention labels to this mailbox, and this user can select this agreement-related mail and then assign a policy and then select the agreement label on it, which will now extend the retention of this email to 7 years. This user can also select an entire Exchange folder and then assign the agreements label to that folder. Now, all the emails inside that folder will get the agreements label on it, and it will extend the retention period of those emails to 7 years instead of 5 years. This is an example of a user manually applying a retention label to content in a SharePoint site. Suppose this SharePoint site has a retention policy of 5 years, but Megan wants to retain some important agreements here for 7 years. So Megan can apply the retention label to this document, which will extend its retention period. So she can see this agreements label in the drop-down here, and she can select it. So this document is now labeled with the retention label agreements, and it will now be retained for 7 years. This is the end user experience for automatically applying the labels. So here my user Megan has uploaded several documents, but she forgot to apply labels manually on them. Now, some of these files contain PII information, which is automatically detected because of the policy that the admin has created. And the items were automatically labeled with retention label called PII data. And now the retention is set on these items as per the label policy settings. After labels are applied, the administrators may want to see label analytics and reports. So the admins can go to Content Explorer in the data classification tab, and they can see how the retention labels are being applied and that too to which locations. You can also drill down into these locations to find the exact content that has been labeled. Then Activity Explorer here helps you see the label actions on content, like who applied the labels or who removed the labels, and also how the label was being applied, whether it was applied manually or whether it was applied automatically. We also provide mailbox archiving capabilities in data lifecycle management. After a user's archive mailbox is enabled, up to 100 GB of additional storage space is available, and all archiving is done in place. If users need more storage space, then you can enable auto expanding archiving and provide up to 1.5 terabyte of additional storage space for archive mailboxes. Now I'm inside Megan's mailbox. After you turn on archive mailbox for Megan, her current mailbox becomes her primary mailbox, and an additional mailbox is created, which is referred to as the archive mailbox. Now, both these mailboxes are considered as Megan's mailbox for compliance features like e-discovery, retention, etc. Now, Megan can access and store messages in her archive mailbox, and she can also copy and move the messages between her primary mailbox and archive mailbox. Since everything here is in place archive, it eliminates creating duplicate copies for archival. Then we also provide import service under data lifecycle management so that you can quickly bulk import PST files to Exchange Online mailboxes. So here you can use network upload method, or you can physically ship the drive with PST files to Microsoft. If you want to import and archive non-Microsoft third-party data from social media or instant messaging and document collaboration platforms, then you can leverage data connectors. These data connectors will import and archive third-party content into the mailboxes within your organization. And once the data is imported to Mailbox, you can apply various Microsoft Purview solutions on them. So this will help you ensure that your organization's non-Microsoft data is in compliance with the regulations and standards that affect your organization. So example, there are telemessage connectors here for importing text messages, call details, as well as WhatsApp messages from employees' corporate phone. And these connectors will import content into the user's mailbox, and then you can apply retention settings or retention labels on them. You can also search this third-party content using eDiscovery. So this was a high-level overview of data lifecycle management. Now I will hand it over to Leo, who will be talking about records management. Over to you, Leo.
Thank you, Bibi, for that excellent presentation and demo of data lifecycle management. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Yes.
Thank you. Before we get into the demo of Microsoft Purview Records Management, I just want to level set on what records management is, essentially what it means. Now, according to ISO standard 15489, records management is efficient and systematic control of the creation, receipt, maintenance, use, and disposition of records, including the processes for capturing and maintaining evidence of and information about business activities and transactions in the form of records. So we see here that records management is all about that high value content, managing it, those crown jewels, if you will, and using workflows so that you can meet compliance, maybe business, legal, or regulatory compliance. It sounds simple, right? But these are some of the challenges and the reality when it comes to records management. First, records, they're everywhere and they're constantly growing. Organizations, they can't depend on users to properly categorize records because, quite frankly, many users, they don't even know what to consider a record. Also, records, they often get lost because, as you saw in Bibi's presentation in the first few slides, sometimes organizations have different systems that contain records, and this obviously increases risk of these records getting lost and ultimately not being declared properly. And finally, records managers rather, they're overwhelmed. And I know this for a fact because I talked to them, some of my customers, because they're bombarded with these different systems, trying to keep up with all their roles. And to add to this, the constant changing of regulatory requirements and business requirements for that matter. Records management in Microsoft Purview helps organizations manage their legal and record keeping responsibilities because the solution provides you with the ability to demonstrate compliance with regulations using defensible processes. Now, as we get into the demo, you're going to see how you can use record labels to prevent that risk of losing those valuable crown jewels in a way that's going to meet your business and compliance requirements. You're also going to see how you could reduce operational and storage costs and how you can reduce risk using a single platform that minimizes that data redundancy. Microsoft Purview retention labels and record labels, they're flexible and they integrate with other solutions in the Purview platform like information protection, data loss prevention, and our eDiscovery solution. Lastly, in the demo, you're also going to see that we provide a multi-stage workflow when it comes to disposing of records once they've reached that their end of retention period, or where they're no longer high value content. There are essentially three key steps on your records management journey. First is defining your retention schedule and categories, and you're going to see options in the demo. Next, classifying content based on those defined categories. And finally, executing retention and disposition actions using policies. So let's get started. So getting to records managers, same way BB showed you, you need to go to Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. Going to the catalog under Solutions, we see the Information Protection and Governance pillar. Scrolling down is the Records Management solution, right below the Data Lifecycle Management solution that BB was showing earlier. Let's click in and open the solution. So on the overview dashboard, you're going to see some highlights like pending dispositions or some label activity that's going on with the labels that you've published. Moving over to the file plan, this is that step one, defining your retention schedule in those categories. These are records and labels that I've already created. And we can see some things like the name of the label, whether it's active or inactive, what it's based on when created or an event, whether or not it's a record. These say no, but I have two that are marked as records, and also the retention duration. Last thing I'll point out here is the disposition type. These three have auto delete, while the last three, there's a review that's required before the content can be disposed of. Now, you have two options when you create your retention, your file plan. You can either start from scratch, or you can actually import. If you already have a file plan, you can import your own by filling out a template that we provide you with, and also following the steps in the Get Tips on how to fill out the template. Once you complete, you upload the template that you've created, and you'll have your customized file plan. Next thing I want to walk you through is creating a record. Very similar to what you've already seen with BB, in terms of creating a retention label, you simply give the record a name. I'm going to call this agency record. You can provide a description for users and a description for admins. Click next. The next thing, you can define some file plan descriptors for things like the business function, the department, category, authority type, or even provision or citation. We do have some pre-built options, but you can also create your own. I'm going to choose legal for the business function, and for provision and citation, I'll choose Freedom of Information Act that I've created previously. Clicking next. So very much like the retention label that you saw in the earlier demonstration, same settings. You define the retention period, whether it's based on when it was created, last modified, or when it was labeled, and event types. And we'll go over event types shortly. One key thing that's different between a retention label and a record is when you're creating a record in records management, you have this option, mark items as a record. Why this is important is because this setting is what makes the content immutable. This means that if this label, this record label, is applied to an email or a file in SharePoint or OneDrive, users, they can't remove the label and they cannot delete the file or modify it. Another thing that you'll see is an option for triggering a disposition review. And we'll go over that process a little bit later. I'm going to select mark item as a record and trigger a disposition review. Next, because I've chosen to trigger a disposition review, I can have up to 5 stages of review before this content is disposed of. I'm going to create stage 1. I'm going to call it review stage 1. And every stage you create, you have to associate it with a user or a mail-enabled security group. I'm going to associate the reviewers, called records managers, to this stage, and I'm going to create a stage 2 review. And this is going to go to the head of the records management department, a guy named Bruce. So 2 stages for review. Once I click next, I can create these labels, and all of those settings are going to be applied to this label. And anytime this label, this record label, is applied to content, those settings are associated with it. I'm going to click cancel because I've already created several labels. Once you have your record labels created, you publish them in the same way that BB showed you earlier, using a label policy. And they can be made available to users so that they can manually apply them in locations like Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, or you can publish the record labels automatically in the same fashion that BB showed you earlier. You also have the options for adaptive scopes, literally the same as you saw earlier. Within the records management solution, you can create events, and events allow you to base a retention period on when a specific type of event occurs. And once the event triggers, it starts the retention period. And any content with the record label for that type of event gets the related actions enforced on that content. A good example of this, as you mentioned earlier, is departed employees or contracts that have expired. Now let's take a look at the end user perspective in SharePoint. So here I have a list of files in a SharePoint library. I can see that they have a retention label associated with them. And this column that says item is a record, where it says yes, that indicates that this is a record label. Another indication is this lock icon we see. This, again, when I mentioned earlier that a record makes that file, or once a record is applied to content, it makes it immutable. So if a user tries to delete this file, they're going to get a warning saying that there's a label that's applied to this content that prevents it from being removed. Additionally, if they try to update the contents of this file, the file's read-only because it's immutable, it can't be changed. In the setting, there are occasions where maybe it's a sales contract that has been marked as a record, but the contract needs to be updated with new terms. We do provide you with an option to unlock the record so that it can be updated with those new terms. And once it's been updated, it can be locked again. And all of this is tracked in the version history of the file within SharePoint, but it also is tracked in another solution in the Microsoft Purview compliance portal called the audit log. If we filter for activities related to record, notice the options we have. When a file was deleted that has been marked as a record, or when the status of a record changes to either locked or unlocked. So full visibility in the audit log. So now that we've gone through the steps of defining a retention schedule in categories, as well as classifying content, let's go through the disposition review. So when a user's been assigned as a reviewer for content that's pending disposition, they're going to get an email notification that has a link that's going to take them to the pending disposition dashboard. So if we click on go there now, here I'm taken to the pending disposition dashboard where I can see all records that are pending disposition. Clicking into contracts, we see all contracts that need to be reviewed and the decision that needs to be made on what to do next. I'm going to click on this first file. The reviewer can verify the contents of the file, provided they're a member of the Content Explorer rollback group. They can also look at the details of this file to get more information, like the expiration date or the date that the item was labeled. Reviewers also have options for things like right away approving the disposal. There's an option to relabel the file or even extending the expiration date of the file. I'm going to choose to approve the disposal and put a note, approve the disposal, and apply. Once this has been approved, we can go to the disposed items to verify that the file has been properly disposed. And there may be scenarios where you need to provide defensible evidence that items have been disposed correctly. So we provide you with an option to export, and it's going to produce a CSV file that's going to give you details like who deleted the file and the deletion date. Many of you that joined the call today, because you're in government, you likely need to meet regulations that require things such as your records being immutable. It's also likely that you need to demonstrate compliance by proving you follow the defensible process when it comes to disposing content. The Microsoft Purview records management capabilities can help your agency follow defensible processes for both retaining and disposing content. Also, the label analytics insights that are provided on the data classification dashboard that BB showed you earlier provides you with transparency on how classifications are applied and how you can improve accuracy in retention using automation. All of these insights can help your data lifecycle management program and keep you in compliance with your record keeping standards. I hope you found today's sessions valuable and interesting. And with that, I'll turn it back over to BB and Barry.
Thanks, Leo. So just a quick reminder for those of you that may have joined a little bit later, we have in the chat 3 poll questions. Again, it'll be anonymous except for the results in case you're interested. And what we have here is some resources. So we have a specific Microsoft state local government compliance email alias. So if you have any questions, wanted to arrange a meeting, you could simply send us an email there and you will get a response with the appropriate person that covers your agency or state or county, and we'll engage there. One more thing, BB, go back for a second. Sorry. So documentation, we have some documentation pages around today's content. We have videos that will be available around this content. We have a blog, and then we have a YouTube channel that you'll see at the bottom. So if you wanted to rewatch this video or any of the sessions that we've had in the past, you can do so at that YouTube channel. And then how do you get started with M365 Purview? We have a bunch of workshops, and these are available if you have unified support from Microsoft. If you don't, we have other resources as well. We have a compliance assessment with unified support, there again, requiring unified support. And if you'd like to schedule a conversation or meeting or what have you, once again, you can just tap that email alias and someone will respond to you shortly.